All right, we're live. Welcome back, everyone, to the 20th episode of Aspire, the Leadership Development Podcast, where we'll be discussing the visions, inspirations, and experiences from top educational leaders. My name is Joshua Stamper, and you can connect with me on Twitter or on Instagram at Joshua_Stamper. This week, I'm so excited to be joined by Evan Robb, the principal of Johnson Williams Middle School in Berryville, Virginia. Prior to this, Evan was an English teacher, department chair, assistant principal, and a junior high school principal. Evan is the author of the Principal's Leadership Sourcebook, Practices, Tools, and Strategies for Building a Thriving School Community, and is currently working on two new books, The 10-Minute Principal and Making Star Pudding. Evan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Josh, I really appreciate you having me on your podcast. As I told you before we started recording, I listen to a lot of podcasts and I really like the work that you're doing. And it's a pleasure for me to spend some time with you this evening.
Well, thank you. That really means a lot for me. Evan, as you know, the show is centered on leadership development, and I would love to hear your personal leadership journey and how you became an administrator.
Thank you for asking that question. I took a roundabout way to becoming an administrator. And along the way, I think, and this is probably not a lot different than many people, there was some resistance on my part because I did not believe when I was younger that education was my path. Both of my parents were teachers, and I grew up in a household where I think there was, to some degree, a presumption that that would be the career that I would pursue. But I didn't typically lean that way when I was in high school and even when I was in college. But I went to grad school to earn an MBA and earned an MBA with an emphasis in finance. And at that point, had a realization that that was not where I wanted to spend the rest of my life. Working within business or working with consulting companies. And I certainly don't see anything against anyone who's chosen that path, but it wasn't right for me. And at that point, I decided, I want to be a teacher. And went back to school and got my courses that I needed to get my endorsement. This is in the very, very early 1990s. And did some substitute teaching while I was working on my courses, and had an opportunity and went into teaching at that point. And best decision that I've ever made. I can tell you that it was very interesting for me because I had finished up one semester with my MBA and I was taking really advanced cost accounting courses, and it was quite a switch to the courses that I was taking for my educational endorsement at that time. But I enjoyed them. They were different. It was refreshing, and it was great. So I took a job in Culpeper, Virginia, for my first teaching job, which was quite a bit of distance from my house. At that time, teaching jobs paid very, very little in Virginia. And Culpeper is about 88 miles. And I use that number carefully because I'll tell you in a moment why. I could not afford to live in Culpeper because I was making $17,000 a year at that time. And I had to commute. And my commute was 88 miles door to door. And I did that for 1 year, but I was committed. I really wanted to be an educator. And after that year, I made some connections with some people up in my local area, and I took a job actually as a teacher at the school where I am currently principal, and continued my teaching career there. And that's where I experienced being a team leader and a department chair. And then I went to a neighboring district as an administrator and opened up a junior high school, um, a district that's near to the district that I work now. And then in 2004, I had an opportunity to come back to the building where I started my teaching career. And I've been very happily a principal of Johnson Williams ever since then. One thing I can tell you that's interesting about my school has only had two principals since 1996. Myself and a friend of mine who's now the assistant superintendent in our division. And we take a lot of pride in that because that's unusual. There's typically more movement in schools nowadays than those numbers. And so I've been at Johnson Williams since 2004 and very happily a building level principal.
That's wonderful. And in your transition from a teacher to an administrator, what was the largest misconception as you began your administrative experience?
That is a good question. I think the largest misconception was that I think at that point I saw a higher parallel between running an effective classroom and running effective school. I do believe there's some parallels there, and I think there's some commonalities. I think, good classrooms have teachers that are enthusiastic and they're passionate and they're positive. They have good expectations to kids. They build trust. They promote creativity. All those those things that we want in a building. But scalability, was certainly something that was a bit of a challenge when I was new to administration. I think the other challenge when I became an administrator, especially as an assistant principal, was kind of figuring out who I was, what I believed in terms of what where I was philosophically, and making sure that I was not acquiescing things that I believed in order to build relationships. And I think that's a big challenge for people that are new to administration. You want to make people happy, you want to please people, but sometimes in doing so, you are compromising what you might think is right.
And as an administrator, what was one change that you wanted to make in education?
Well, that has changed over time. There are a lot of things that I'd like to see changed in education. One of the things that I come back to a lot is I like to bring innovation and creativity into places that I work, and I like to set up environments, and certainly in terms of the culture of a building, where people are free and they're encouraged to explore their creativity in an environment where they don't have fear of reprisal. And that's big, because that's in a lot of schools, in schools that I have visited and seen throughout my career, I've seen environments that are a little more compliant based, where things such as creativity were not as encouraged. But I think in order to bring real innovation into a school, you have to have an environment where people can explore their creativity, and they can be a little more adventurous with their curriculum, because that's how you get better. The other thing that I'd like to see within, it's interesting, a trend that I've seen over the past few years, and I see it more and more now, is a shift from the type of education that I received when I was a student, which was more a passive receiver of information. And maybe you can relate to that too, Josh, where typically in a history class, the teacher would fill a blackboard with notes, and there would be a lecture, and I would take notes, and I would take a quiz. And I see that radically different than what I hope to see in education, which is a change towards more personalization of learning within the classroom. And that's a lot different. So that's saying that, instead of one size fits all, we're going to move education to meeting the needs of individual learners within a classroom.
Yeah, and I
Yeah, and
want
I
to,
want to,
as a lead
as a
learner,
leader,
how are you
how are you
able to
able
still
to consider
discovery and
discovering
growth
growth?
with that?
My apology, but I'll need you to repeat that question. I didn't quite hear that.
Yeah, of course. I just wanted to go back to the creativity piece that you had answered. As a lead learner, how are you able to instill consistent discovery and growth with your staff?
Well, one of the ways that you do that is you have to make sure that your actions are consistent with your words. So if you believe uh, in innovation, if you believe you encourage creativity and innovation within the classroom, people cannot see your actions to be different or diametrically different than your words. So you have to model that, and you have to model those things, and you need to be able to share those stories with staff. One of the things that I have found, and I'm certainly comfortable with, is that when I try new things, they're not always successful, and that's okay. And I have to be comfortable within my position as a building administrator to show that to staff, because I think that sends a message that it's okay. You try something, sometimes it doesn't work, but you got another day the next day. And so modeling that is very important. And I think the other thing that's important is bringing in quality and ongoing professional development for people, so they can increase their repertoire and increase the ways that they can work with kids within the classroom. And so, innovation just for the sake of just to be innovative may not necessarily improve learning within the classroom. But I think that when that spirit is coordinated with purposeful, intentional professional development that is decided upon through collaboration with staff based off of, data indicators within the building, that you give people the skills that they can try things in a different way, and in turn, set up an environment, hopefully, where people are comfortable to give those things a try. One of the things that I have seen, and this is interesting, because it has to do with innovation, it has to do with professional development, but I always like to see teachers try different ways to help make connections with kids. And so I'll give you a little example. And this has to do with efficacy, which is something that I believe is incredibly important within education. The belief that the educator has the ability to make a difference in the lives of children. And so a teacher, potentially an inexperienced teacher or a teacher who has not had a lot of professional development, may have a limited repertoire of skills or strategies to work with students if they are struggling within a class. If they have limited strategies and the students aren't finding success, they may draw conclusions. And those conclusions may not necessarily be correct, but a plausible conclusion is that, well, I taught it, they weren't able to get it, and so they weren't able to learn that. That in turn can impact someone's efficacy because then suddenly they may not believe that they have a high ability to help students within their classroom. But however, if the school has coordinated and purposeful professional development where people are enhancing their skill set and the way that they can work with kids, and that's done in tandem with an environment where innovation and being creative within the classroom is encouraged, you increase the likelihood that not only creativity will occur, but purposeful creativity, and also increase the likelihood that kids will find success, which is absolutely what it's all about.
Most definitely. And making the shift from assistant principal to principal, what was the biggest surprise to you in the new position?
I think the responsibility of the position can be a little bit overwhelming when you first enter it. You have I can recall, and I've written about this before. There are a couple moments in my life that I remember very, very well. One moment that I remember well was the night before I started ninth grade. And the reason is it was in a private school from first until eighth grade, and ninth grade I attended a public high school, and I didn't know a lot of people at all. And I remember the night before I started ninth grade, being incredibly scared and nervous about what that was going to be like. And the only time well, I guess there were a couple times in my life where those feelings came back, but one time that it definitely came back was the night before I walked into a building as a principal. And part of that is this realization that if it goes really well, it's going to have a lot to do with your leadership, um, in terms of impacting positive change for kids and for staff and for a community. But along with that, there's an opposite, which is if it doesn't go really well and the culture is not positive and teachers don't want to work in the building and kids are not happy and parents aren't happy, it has a lot to do with the principal also. And that's big, and there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. So the responsibility of the position for me was one of the most challenging, and also to make sure that that I am guiding people to become successful and to develop. I am not the kind of principal who's ever believed that I am the sole instructional leader of a building. I want a building where people are empowered to develop their leadership. And I have teachers in my building who are very, very strong instructional leaders, and that's great. I'm proud of that, and I want to see that continue. And I remember feeling, thinking about that when I first went into the principal position of, there were things that I experienced when I was a teacher, assistant principal, or even a kid. When I would think about my principal, some of them were positive, and some of them, quite frankly, were rather negative. And so when you move into that position, you have to come to grips with the realization that you have the ability, if you make good decisions and you're intentional and you're kid centered, to create wonderful positive change for staff and for students and for a community. But if you're not really giving a lot of thought to the position will run you. And if the position starts running you, and I've seen this happen before, move into a very kind of reactionary mode as a principal, and you're never moving forward. You're just plugging the dam, shall we say, for every hole that pops open. And sometimes that's part of the job, but if you lose sight of the big picture, and that's a big responsibility, of when you're the principal of a building, you can lose effectiveness and lose effectiveness rather quickly.
Hmm. And what do you think is the largest barrier to a healthy school culture?
The largest barrier to a healthy school culture has a lot to do with relationships and trust. If trust is not embedded in a school, a culture cannot thrive. And if positive relationships are not in place in a school, a culture cannot thrive. And in terms of relationships, that's a tricky one. And I spoke about that a few minutes ago. It's not healthy if the relationships are born out of disconnect between beliefs. It's very, very positive when everyone's on board and understands the vision and the mission of the school, and relationships are positive within the building. But for relations to be effective, people have to have trust. And trust is complex, and it's one of those things that you have to take a lot of time to build, and you can lose it with a snap of a finger. And if relationships and trust, are not in a school will never have a positive culture. And if a school doesn't have a positive culture, nothing extraordinary is going to happen, period. Culture trumps everything. And I think where sometimes principals make a mistake is they're either presumptive of culture, that it just kind of moves along fine, or they underestimate the value of culture within a building. And then there are lots of nuances that go into culture and creating a healthy climate in the building. It has to do with the traditions of a school. It has to do with the stories of a school, and the connections. I like a school that has a nice family atmosphere with staff. I want people to enjoy coming to work, and I think as an administrator also, that people who come into work and they're excited about being at the school, that has a positive impact on the climate, has a positive impact on learning within a building. And as an administrator, we have a responsibility to help build the culture, to carry that culture forward, and to make sure that we are positive and focused on relationship building and focused on trust building within our schools.
What do you do on your campus to increase student voice?
We do, as a middle school, we I think we do a lot. We have a very, very active SCA, which is our form of student government, and gives students a lot of opportunities to work with me and our administrative team. And we have each class has an ambassador who represents the elected officers on the SCA, and we also have a lot of clubs in our building. I think this year we're approaching 20 different clubs that give kids opportunities to have voice, but also to feel connected with the building. One of the things that I'm excited about in our building is we're continuing to explore how social media can increase student voice within our school, and we have a student news program where students can communicate to parents about all the exciting things that are happening within the building. We continue to explore different types of social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, in order to give students voice, and in order to better connect with our communities. Uh, and I think the other piece that's not as codified but's really important is in a building where teachers are really student centered. There is always going to be a higher communication where students feel that they can have a voice within the building. And that's something that has a lot to do with the culture and the climate of a school also. I can recall that when I was in school, I had some teachers who I absolutely would not speak to, whether I had anything good or anything bad to say. I just wanted to simply get through the class. But I'm very proud that I have a building where teachers are incredibly student focused, and so students have voice in a non formalized way, but which is the voice they have to their teachers or to their counselors or to administrators. But they also have voice through student government and through clubs, and just the many, many activities that we have available within our school.
Mhm. In addition to your admin position, speak at conferences, blog, you have your own podcast, and you're very active on social media. How did you find your voice beyond the campus?
My apology. This is the last part. How did I find my voice?
How did you find your voice beyond the campus?
Social media has been a wonderful world for me to enter and to be a part of. And I have found that, expanding my ability to connect through social media has helped me grow immensely as an educator. Certainly to anyone who is aspiring to be an administrator, I would strongly encourage getting set up on Twitter and following people that are of interest with you and getting involved with Twitter chats and enjoy this unique opportunity that we have now that simply did not exist when I was entering the field of education, where every day an incredible amount of information can flow at you. And it flows at you through Twitter all the time, depending on who you follow. And you can make decisions as a learner about what you want to learn and what you don't want to learn. And that's incredibly empowering and speaks a little bit to what I was talking about when you asked me about changes in education that I'd like to see. I'm really into personalization. So not only, of course, personalization from the teacher to the student, but I'm into personalization for people's learning as adults. I think that I think the most successful people, and not just teachers, see themselves as learners. And social media is a wonderful way to learn. So I encourage that. And I also found that I started finding my voice more by blogging. And fortunately, I'm fortunate to do that with my mother. We have a blog called the Robb Review blog, and it has been really exciting to be able to write. We typically write 750 to 1,000 word blog posts about things that are of interest to us, and sometimes there are things that are resonating in the moment, and sometimes there are things that I've been thinking about for some period of time. But being able to get that information down and share that information with people, and then have feedback from people and be able to interact with people based off of how they view or how they understand the thoughts and opinions that I've shared or my mother has shared, has been extremely empowering.
And you're currently working on a new book, The 10-Minute Principle, will help our listeners become better leaders.
Yeah, I'm excited about this project that I am doing with Corwin, and the focus of that book is taking a very complicated job, the job of a building level administrator, and creating opportunities that can be done within approximately 10 minutes of time. So I would be very, very clear to say that it is impossible to learn how to be a principal in 10 minutes. But that's not the focus of the book. The focus of the book is looking at a complex job, and I recommend, either through story or through different opportunities, things that can be done in approximately 10 minutes of time. So maybe a walkthrough. What could that look like if you had 10 minutes to do that? Or a positive phone call to a parent. What could that look like? And so I go down that path, and it is quite exciting. And what's exciting to me about that book is it's not necessarily a book that has to be read cover to cover. It's a book that an administrator can access and say, okay, I'm really interested in community relations, and here's a section on it, and here's some really good tips that I can quickly access, and put into my day.
And for those starting their leadership journey, what advice do you have for them?
What advice do I have for them? Make sure that you're doing it for the right reason. I think sometimes, people can go into administrative jobs for the wrong reason, and I'll be frank, because I want this to be valuable to people. I have known people who have sought or thought they would seek out administrative positions for a salary increase or something of that nature, and it is absolutely the worst reason to do it. You have to believe that your purpose to go into administration is to help people. The servant model is a very alive and well model of leadership, and it exists within educational administration. It cannot be about you, it has to be about everyone else. So you have to go into that job wanting to do the best that you can for kids, for teachers, and for a community. The other thing that I would say is you need to really spend some time and make sure that you understand who you are and what you believe in. And it's very important. And the other thing is, hopefully you'll have, new administrators will have good mentors along the way. But I would always recommend that people try to find a school that they feel fits right with their educational philosophy. Because if there's one way that I can guarantee people will be unhappy, it's to seek out a position or navigate yourself through an interview and find yourself in a position where you are not in philosophical agreement with the way that a building runs. That is not a good path. And then I guess the other pieces that I would say is you have to be patient and you have to be willing to work really, really hard. One of the things that I believe, Josh, and I believe this really, really to my core, is I don't necessarily believe that some people are just blessed with superior intellect or some sort of genetic ability to do something that I cannot do. Although we have not gone into it in this particular podcast, really into growth mindset and a belief that with enough effort and enough opportunity, people can achieve. And I think that that's a really important belief to bring into the job if you're going to be an administrator. And so within the job of administrator, it kind of goes like this: people who are successful work hard and they don't give up. A lot of times, the difference between successful people and unsuccessful people is people who we may believe were not successful, they may have given up along the way. And so I admire grit. I think as educators, we like to see that with kids. We like grit, we like perseverance. And I admire that within the teaching staff in my building. And it is absolutely an admirable trait for a administrator. But I would say if you dig all the way down to the bottom of the bag, you got to make sure you really like kids, because you're going to spend a lot of time around them, and they're wonderful, and they are growing growing into adults. And it is a privilege and it's an honor to be able to help young people grow up and help them make good choices.
It's very true. And in closing, what is the most enjoyable aspect of leadership?
I think for me, the most enjoyable aspect of leadership is seeing other people find success. And now within schools, with kids, that may be kids who you believe that through the impact of your team, you were able to change their trajectory, which maybe at the end of the day is really what it's all about. The power of education is changing pathways for people. So that's something that's very important. The Would you mind repeating the second part of that question again? I want to
No,
make
I
sure.
was just asking, what is the most enjoyable aspect of leadership?
Okay, the other thing um, is helping to building a team that's committed to kids, and working with a team to create a culture and a positive climate within a building, working with a team that that is creative and that's innovative. That is inspiring to me. I like to tap into the energy of people who want to be better and who are willing to work hard and achieve something special.
How can our listeners connect with you on social media?
I can be followed on Twitter, and I would love it if people followed me at capital E, capital R, OBB, capital P for principal. So Robb Principal. And also on Facebook at the Robb Review. On LinkedIn, you can find me at Evan Robb. And also the Robb Review blog, which I would encourage any of the listeners to check out. Laura and I try to put out a blog at least once a week, sometimes a little more frequently. We have guest bloggers come on once a month to the Robb Review blog. And Laura and I also have a podcast called the Robb Review Podcast. And we put a podcast out about every month, and those get sent out on Twitter, and we would encourage people to listen to those also.
Please continue to check out the Aspire podcast on SoundCloud and iTunes and share your ratings and reviews. Don't forget to use the Aspire Lead hashtag as you continue the conversation on Twitter. Evan, thank you so much for being on the program.
Josh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Keep up the great work.